All right, good afternoon. Let's get started. But for now, we're going to talk about encumbrances and just monitoring POs. Getting very close to the end of the fiscal year, and we need to start thinking about what we're going to do with some of these because last I looked, there was about 1,600 of them sitting out there, and we need to start looking at closing them if we're not going to be using them, that kind of deal. And in working with our encumbrances, it's really important we understand how we can create them in Intacct. And so on this screen here, I've got a list of how that's done. All of the transactions on the right, there's 7 of them there. Standard purchase requisitions, contract services requisitions, and so on. Once any of those requests are fully approved, an encumbrance is created. And on the left side, it lists the encumbrance journal entry that's done, in which it increases your expense account balance as far as encumbrances go by the amount approved. And then it does an entry to an account we call encumbrance control. And that's what happens when we submit any of these transactions. If it's not listed on screen, it has nothing to do with creating an encumbrance. So like purchase order, for example, is not here. Contract services purchase order is not there. Travel request, vendor payment is not there. Those do not create encumbrances. They might have a role in the process of this, but in terms of creating encumbrances, these are the transactions we're referring to. And those are anything that's fully approved that's on this list. So if we've submitted something, it doesn't create an encumbrance. And that's important to know. Like in travel requests, we see this often, where you may have $1,000 of budget available for travel, and you have 2 people traveling somewhere. So you might have someone whose travel is $800 and the other person is $800. Well, both would pass the budget test on submission because submitting something doesn't affect your encumbrances. So at the time of you submitting it, Intacct is certain you have $1,000 available. When that first transaction is approved, $800 of budget is now encumbered, and that would reduce the amount available to $200. So then the second one won't be able to be approved anymore because now it would exceed the budget. So just something to keep in mind as we're doing this, because you can submit $1 million worth of requests as long as each one individually is less than the budget available. Intacct won't consider any of those until something is fully approved and our budget is affected. So these are what creates our commitments, our encumbrances. These are the transactions that release them. So we have vouchers, justification workflows, travel reconciliations, everything on the right is what releases an encumbrance. So the standard purchase requisition creates the encumbrance. And we can see eventually it can become a voucher. It might become a justification workflow if we've exceeded the amount of the purchase request. Or we might close partial PO because we no longer need the PO or a partial portion of it. Those are what's going to release an encumbrance. And just like in the first example, that's when they're fully approved, not because it's been submitted. So like in the payment request that's on screen, Lynette is the final approver in all of these. So once Lynette has given her approval, that's when we would see the encumbrance release, and then the amount of the expense would then post to our general ledger for the funding sources we're using or the account numbers. And again, on this list, no purchase order, no contract services purchase order. Things like that aren't here because they don't have an effect on our encumbrances. They're important in the process of the workflow, but have no posting effect on our general ledgers, on our financial reports. And so the information we'll look at today is going to consider all of that and the building of our reports or viewing what we're going to see out here. So if you have questions about the creating an encumbrance or releasing encumbrance, please put that in the chat box. And with all of this, the best way you can monitor any of this activity is, depending on how frequent your program is doing purchasing transactions, you should be looking at your financial report frequently. So if we're doing transactions every day, you should be looking at this every day to see, when I create an encumbrance, I have a purchase requisition approved. Did the encumbrance post to my account as I expected? Or on the other side, if we're making payments, or my voucher is approved, am I reviewing my financial report to make sure the encumbrance is cleared as I've expected? That way we're staying on top of this. If we think we have an issue, we can reach out to our program monitor to ask for guidance about that. Always best to be doing that now instead of to the last day, and then we're trying to rush everybody else to review our encumbrances. We could be doing this every week and taking that chance to make sure our financial reports are looking good. And if we have purchase orders that we're not using, that's taking a portion of your budget and not making it available for you to spend on other things. So that's why we want to keep on top of that stuff. Tracy says she's been asked about an encumbrance release and it might be a good example for the session. So maybe she'll be typing up a storm for us here in a minute. So we'll keep an eye on that. All right. So when we typically are looking in Intacct, we're looking at a financial report, something like what we see on screen. So I have the fiscal year expenses view for this report. And the account number I'm going to be looking at today, so we're not going to go through all this stuff, is the utilities line item. So for our report, when we say go look at your reports, you see that we can see under the encumbrances column that this particular fund has $2,900 in encumbrances. And great, but that's helpful to know the amount that's out there, but it might not help us understand where it is. And so in these one funding source view reports, we get a blue hyperlink. We could click there and it's going to take us to the general ledger for the encumbrances, so we can review that in a little more detail. And depending how you use the general ledger, the information may pop up for that. So if I click there, we're going to get a report that comes up. And we can see every single transaction that's occurred in the general ledger, which if we're busy like in this fund, has a lot of transactions, might be pretty hard to find out which one of these things ties to an open encumbrance. So it might not be the best thing to use for any of that. So going back to our financial report, it's good to have that information. That's the starting point for us. But we can dig in a little bit deeper. We don't have to rely on the general ledger report if it's like super big information. And the report I want to talk about is the dimension balance report. So Tracy's put in there that a program has a $1,000 purchase order, wanted to pay it, but it exceeds the payment exceeds the purchase order by $200. The available balance is there to pay the difference. However, Intacct gives them an error message that budget is not available. That could be one of two things. There's a rule written into Intacct that doesn't let you exceed a purchase order by 10%. So if we're converting that to a voucher, that may be the error message that person is getting, meaning you'd have to use the justification workflow to exceed the purchase order amount with having the proper approvals and document attached. Would be the first thing that comes to mind. All right. So if we're going to use the dimension balance report, we have maybe like 10, 11 people in here right now. Other than the half of the people in here that's in finance, any of you other users, are you using the dimension balance report to get financial information? So if you are, let me know in the chat box. Or if you're not, hopefully this will be helpful to you. So we'll start from the home screen in Intacct. We're going to go to our menu, to General Ledger, and then under the Reports area to Dimension Balances. Like with most of the canned reports inside of Intacct, the very first section is going to ask us what period of time do we want to report on. I think current month is the default selection everywhere. So if we only want to report on encumbrance activity in the current month using this date, so the entire month of August, we can leave it like that. If we want to know about our fiscal year, like we were looking at with the report earlier, we can scroll through the reporting periods and find fiscal current year. Or alternatively, you could put in a beginning day and an ending day, which would override the two top fields. So you can choose one or the other. I'm choosing fiscal current year, and with this as of date being a date inside of the fiscal year, that automatically makes the report want to show the entire fiscal year 24. The next part of this report is we need to choose the type of book we want to report on. All of our expenses and revenue and all of our balance sheet activity reports to our accruals book. We're not going to use that today. We're looking for encumbrances. So there's a little part right below reporting book and accrual that says other. And when I click the select button, it's going to let me choose encumbrances. So I'm going to move it from the available items section to the selected items section. Do we want to combine it with our expenses? No, we don't, because we're only interested in encumbrances. So I'm going to uncheck that box. We're not going to look at budget, so in the content selection, I'm just going to leave it at actual. We don't budget in the encumbrance area, so there's really not much of a point to use that for this part. Now we need to tell Intacct what account number or account numbers do we want to use. We have an option to choose a range of accounts. So that line item we're looking at is utility. So if I select that, that means this report will be limited to just that account number. I could choose multiple accounts if I wanted to report on different accounts, but maybe not all of them from my financial report. So if I hit the multiple accounts button and then hit select accounts, I could come through here and one by one add different accounts. So say I wanted utilities and office supplies but no other accounts, I could pick those two. And when I hit save, that would be my selection to report on. If I wanted to report on all accounts, I could do that and get all encumbrance balance activity for every account. Or I could choose a group of accounts. So for example, if I type in all EX, then I can choose between these two. So all EXPGL accounts, that would return all expense general ledger accounts in this report. What we're going to focus on just that one report, or just that one account, 68100. In the next filters area, we have to use program and checkbook at a minimum. So the report we were looking at was for general ops. Their checkbook is number 2, and we're going to use their funding source. So in combination of all that, that's what we're going to return for encumbrances. We could add more information if we were using customers, like if we knew the vendor were using that kind of stuff to zero in a little bit more. We're going to leave these blank because I want it to be any encumbrance for this funding source, for this account number, for the fiscal year. That's what we're telling Intacct to give back to us. Down here is a dimension value box. What information do we want to see come out in this report? If you've used it before, like I have, it has the information that's I last used on a report. If not, if you've never used the report, it's probably going to look like that. It's just going to be a box that says select. So if we came through here and we find we want the account ID and we want the funding source ID listed in there, and we wanted no information, we can do that. However we list this is the order we're going to sort in. So if I have account ID first, that's the first thing this report's going to sort on. And then it'll list the funding sources that would relate to the information coming back. So I'm going to leave it in that order for now. So we've got our selection. I'm asking for it to be cascaded, so it might be a little more presentable that way. So we'll look at what that looks like right now. And pretty similar to that financial report, we're just getting that total for our encumbrances. So not much better in the financial report. But what do we use on our purchasing request? We use vendors. So if we wanted this report to break it down by vendor for us, we're going to hit customize and go right back down to that dimension values section of the report. And I want to add, we can choose vendor ID and name, just the ID or just the name. So you can report on whichever the information you choose. So there's a lot of dimensions there. I'm going to use vendor ID and name. So we've got account ID, funding source ID, vendor ID and name. We rerun the report. Now this information is starting to pull together for us. So we know of our $2,900 in total open encumbrances right now. We have something open with Cherry Todd, something open with solid waste, something open with Shashangu propane. That could be very helpful to us, to where now if we go to our purchase orders, maybe we're going to search for open purchase orders to find those. So let's look for Shashangu propane because that's what I queued up for us. So if we went to purchase order or purchasing order, purchase order, that's how I got to the screen. And I'm using the view for open POs, FY open POs. And I've just filtered it so it's only showing us Shashangu propane. And here's the list of all of the open POs for it. This is general ops. So we know this is the person who's probably done the transaction. But we could see from there, we have an open PO for $644. On the dimension balance report, the purchase order, or the encumbrance, was for $1,564. So we don't see any other transactions that are probably from general ops. It's going to be a lot easier for program users to see this because you'll just see your transactions. In finance, we see everyone else's stuff that's open. So we get a big list of that. So if we were Carol and we're logged in, we're just going to see this one, and we know that's not going to tie out to our financial report because we're looking for $1,500. We could go through and look through declined vouchers. Did we not convert a purchase requisition? What's happened so that there's still almost $1,000 that's not listed on our open POs? And that's going to lead us to the next report we're going to look at, and that's called Purchasing Transaction Detail. So we got two answers about the dimension balance report. Are people here using the Purchasing Transaction Detail report? So I'm going to leave this page. We're going to go to the Report Center. And don't worry about the list of reports on my screen because there's going to be a lot more than you probably see. But we're all going to have this report. If I use the search bar, start typing the name of that report, Purchasing Transaction Detail Report, we can see that here. If you want to use that report in the future, this is a great report for what we're about to do here. There's a little star next to it, so if you don't want to have to keep searching for it later, we can hit the gold star to make it a favorite. It'll add it to this favorites section up here on the menu part, or on the upper left corner next to our house. If we click that, this will list that report for us once we leave the screen to update the page. And then you can just click right there and open up the page. So I'm going to click on this report. And a lot like that dimension balance report, we are being asked the same information. Now this is a report I built, so I made it the default thing says fiscal current year to date. Not fiscal current year, to date, meaning the first day of the fiscal year to whatever day is included in this column. So it defaults to today, so whatever day we're doing this, it's going to have that day's date. You can always change the selection if you want to use different periods of time. So if we wanted the current year instead of current year to date, so we went all the way to 9/30, by all means you can do that. Or you can change the date here to 9/30/24. Or instead you can pick a beginning and ending date. And then just like building the other report, we need to start giving the system information on what we want returned to us. So first is our checkbook and our program. Our funding source that we're using. There's our vendor that we're looking for. And if we know the account number, so we were using 68100, we could do that. So we're really zeroing in on what we want. And the last thing is we can give it information about the type of purchasing transactions we want to see. After all, it's the Purchasing Transaction Detail Report. The purchasing type, you can choose one of the purchasing types in the workflows. So you could choose close partial POs, or you could choose justifications, non-PO vouchers, whatever information you want. I'm not going to choose anything for this one because I don't want to limit it to just one type of transaction. And if we're familiar with the purchasing states, this is where I'm going to use this to my advantage to only bring up what's going to total that $1,500 in open encumbrances. If something's been submitted, it's waiting for approval, it's probably not anything we're going to worry about in the moment. We're looking for something that's declined. So if General Ops had submitted a payment and it's been declined, that encumbrance isn't clearing. Did we leave something waiting to get converted into our next step? So pending is a good one to use. Partially converted. Did we not completely convert one of our purchase orders? That kind of thing. So we'll leave it at there, but there's a list of other types there. In Intacct, there is a help button. I don't know if anyone here uses that often. But I'm going to leave this screen to go look at the help bar here. So up here on this corner that says help and support, If you go to help on this page, it'll give you information about the current page, so like the dimension balance report that would do. Or you could hit Help Center. And if you hit Help Center and ask about the purchasing transaction states, it's going to tell you what the meaning of all the things mean. Partially converted, approved, closed, all those things. You would get a definition list from Intacct on what those mean. All right, but back to our report. We're going to use those 3 states there. We can use as many as we want, or we can leave it blank and let it just be everything possible that could come out. But I'm trying to drill in specifically, so I'm happy with that. And if we click View, the report will run on screen. All right, I was getting worried. So now we can see on the screen here that there's that PO we saw that was open on the purchasing screen list for purchase orders. But what we also have is we have a purchase requisition still pending. So back in November of 23, we opened up a requisition for Sichangru propane, and we've left it in the pending status ever since. And so we get our total 1,564. That's from our financial report and our dimension balances report. And we get the link to the transaction, so we can make a determination whether or not we're going to use that to, is there a bill that we've left unpaid from this period? It looks like we were asking for 100 gallons in tank 1 and 200 gallons in tank 3 and a couple other tanks getting propane. So do we have an unpaid bill with Sichangru propane, or is it an order that wasn't able to be made or didn't get delivered? And we need to close this so that we can free up $920 of our budget, or just to close those in preparation of the end of year coming in 54 days. So Tracy asked, what do we select for the state? So in this specific one, I used declined just in case we had converted our purchase order, but the voucher was declined or the justification was declined. I used pending, and that's what we got, was the purchase requisition that was left pending because it had never been converted to a purchase order. And I used partially converted just in case the purchase order screen was only listing pending, so we could see any blanket purchase orders that were used but still left open because they weren't completely depleted. And so that's how, in conjunction with your financial report, what's going to lay the groundwork for your encumbrances. You could use the dimension balance report to get right in there to find out which vendors we have our encumbrances with. We can go to our purchasing screens like that purchase order screen to look for our open POs so we can take whatever action we need to either pay the bill, close the purchase order, whatever it is we need to do. And then we can use this purchasing transaction detail report to specifically define those transactions that are making up the vendor's encumbrances. All right. Does anybody else have questions? About any of the reports? All right, so we're waiting to see if anyone's typing any. Again, I will share this information, the recording, whenever it's made available, or basically when it's finished processing in my screen recorder. I'll send the link out to this so it'll be loaded onto my YouTube page. All right, I've got no other questions coming in. Thank you everybody for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.